Hi, in the previous video we talked about how to install the Flatcar Linux VM in VirtualBox that contained the United Manufacturing Hub Kubernetes deployment. One issue we had during the installation was that the feature of having a static IP was not yet implemented. This meant that our VM got an IP address assigned by DHCP on the host, which means that this IP address is dynamic. It can potentially change. Now, this is annoying in production environments because ideally you want each virtual machine to have the same static IP always, so you can always find it easily. If, for instance, you have some scripts where the IP address is hard-coded, and you rerun these scripts after your actual IP address of the VM has changed, it will no longer work because the script cannot find the VM. So in today's video, we will fix this problem by configuring systemd networkd on the Flatcar Linux VM to assign it a static IP always. So the way this is done is that we have to connect to, let me open a terminal here. So from the last session, we have our VirtualBox program running here. We see that we have the same Flatcar VM. We can go ahead and start it like this. Right, it's booting. And from the previous session, we see that the IP address will still be the one we had at the end. So that was SSH. Here it is. So we are on the network interface EMP0S3, which is my Ethernet network interface. And we see that the IP address of the machine is the same as last time. So 192.168.178.175. We can SSH, of course, as the core user on this IP address. And it will work. It will prompt for a password. We enter the password UMH and we are inside the machine. Now, if we look at an article here, network configuration with networkd, from the Flatcar Linux website itself, we see under the chapter common customizations, network configuration with networkd, that we can actually assign a static IP to this virtual machine. And for this, we have to configure the networkd unit located on the virtual machine. So in etc systemd and network directory. Once we add some new rules via a file, it's important we don't forget to restart this systemd service with this command. So let's go over the change we have to make. Basically, we will create a static.network file. Let's create it as the root user. So sudo vim etc. Then in the systemd directory, network, we create a file static.network. Right. And in this file, we can copy paste this small script here. But you have to be careful because, first of all, if I quickly return to my host computer, so I open a terminal on my host, and let's just see what my IP address configuration is like. So I can see that I have a lot of network interfaces, but the one that I use for both the VM and my host Ethernet is called ENO1, right? Let's look at the address. The address is 192.168.178.146 and it's a /24 network, which means that the three first octets, 192.168.178, denote the address of the network, and then the final octet The 146 denotes the address of the machine on that network. If, for example, I would say what my route is, I see that the gateway I use is the 192.168.178.1 gateway to my router. So this is how I go to the internet. It's the main gateway for my network. Now this is important because remember, in the settings of the Flatcar VM, the networking, we used a bridged adapter on INO1. This means that we're basically sharing this network interface, which means that the gateway for my virtual machine should be the same as for my host machine, which is why we'll have to change this text slightly. First of all, the network name, let me first write this and then quit. So if I do the same command this time on the virtual machine in Flatcar Linux, I see that again I have a bunch of interfaces, and the one I'm interested in is ENP0S3. We see that there we have the IP address of the virtual machine 192.168.175/24, and that's what we want to update. First of all, let's take over the name ENP0S3. So if I now again update the file, it's ENP0S3, right? And then the gateway we have to use was the same as on my host. So that means 192.168.178. 178, right? It's this one, 178.1. And on this network, I can now give this machine a certain IP address. So again, here we change the third octet to 178. And now this last number, the .15, will basically identify the machine on this network. We can pick any number we want. Let's say we want to give it the IP address 13. So we can now write this file. We now see that the ENP0S3 network will obtain this address on this gateway. So let's write that. And remember, now we have written this machine. So now we have to restart our network D service. So we can copy this command, run it here. There we go. And that has been restarted. And let me now close this terminal, because of course, if I restart my system D service and my IP address changed, SSH will also, the connection will also be broken because the IP address changed. Now let's look if this had an effect. How do I best check this? Actually, let us try to SSH core again to this machine using the old IP address 175. If I run this, we see that this no longer works. There is no route to the host. That means that the IP address of our virtual machine has changed. Let's again start this machine. It's now running here. We see now that indeed the IP address of this machine is no longer .175, it's now .13. This means that if I want to connect from my host, I have to change the 175 to a 113. And there we go. We found the machine under this new IP address. Again, we can say that we trust the host, input the password, and we are in. If I look at the IP address of this network interface, we see that the ENP0S3 now has IP address .13. And this is a static address, which is very convenient because it will always be the same no matter if this machine is restarted, rebooted, and so on. One last thing we can do to make our life more convenient, given that the machine now has a static IP address, we can actually add it to the known hosts on our system. So if I update this file, I can add a new entry with the IP address of the machine. So that would be 192.168.178.13, and I will call it Flatcar. Update the host file. There we go. And now I would expect that if I want to SSH as the core user, I can now use the DNS name Flatcar, and it should be able to find it. And there we go. So it resolved it to 1.13. And again, enter the password, and I'm inside. So I can try it one more time. Flatcar password, and there we go. To recap what we did, we updated the host file, the network, the systemd config file for the network, here, where we said that for this particular Ethernet network interface, we assign the static IP address 192.168.178.13 under the same gateway as on my host computer. We restarted the systemd service, and now we can connect to the machine using this IP address. And finally, to make it more convenient for us, we replaced the IP address with an actual name using the host files here. So now I can just connect to my virtual machine using SSH as the core user and the name Flatcar, and I'm in. There is one last step we need to complete in order for our cluster to work with the new static IP address. And that step is detailed in the article here, how to fix the error while proxying requests and so on. In essence, what we did, we essentially changed the IP address of the entire cluster, which is something that Kubernetes doesn't really like. So in order to get everything working again, we need to apply these 6 small steps, which essentially involves connecting to the cluster, stopping it, resetting it, and then restarting it. So if again I SSH into the Flatcar VM as the core user, I can see that the first step involves stopping the mini Kubernetes service. It's now stopped. Then, as the root user, doing a reset of the cluster. That has been completed. And once that is done, we can start the cluster again. And it will work under the new static IP address. And finally, once everything is started up, we can check the status of this service, and seems to be up and running. Now let's see if we can use OpenLens to connect to our cluster. I have it bookmarked here, and everything works. As you can see, we have here all our services, and everything looks good. And as you can see, the new external IP is indeed 192.168.178.13.